room.
Hey, good morning. We're being recorded. Get the slide back up on the screen. And you remote guys, you should be able to see the screen. And I got that. So, Totsi, I'm now seeing your video through the monitor. And
I didn't put the start video on it, so you should get it now.
well, what I don't know is, can you guys still see the screen 150 week 152B on your monitors?
Yep,
Okay, let's get
it's
started.
great.
Last week, we began with some major technical issues. We spent probably half our time just dinking around with trying to come up with a hybrid meeting. In the meantime, both Bill and I have worked outside of this meeting, and we've come up with some new ideas, and they seem to be working better this morning. And for that, I'm grateful. We were able to dive into verses 32 and 33. And this is where Mary arrives to meet Jesus and then ask him, why she asked Jesus the same question as her sister Martha did. Why weren't you there? If you would have been here, our brother would not have died. And then we examined that last week, and we spent the remainder of our time looking at verse 33 and what Jesus's response meant. So I'm going to quickly go over those verses just by review, and then we're going to move into it. Mary came to the place where Jesus was. She saw him, fell down. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. I'm going to move quickly. Mary brings to Jesus the same question, and also the other participants from the Jews from Jerusalem, they share the same feeling, or at least a portion of them do. The reason is that there exists, this was a point from last week, a comprehensive perspective at this occasion, which is a death, that all is lost. And so I want you to kind of keep that in your mind. All is lost from their perspective. And there's little doubt that this group there in mourning at the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, that they, no doubt, being human, they talked about different scenarios and what ifs. And so that's how we're kind of casting this scene. They're all looking at it as all is lost. There is no hope. Lazarus is gone, and that is the occasion. That is what prompted Mary, Lord, if you had been here. And notice here, it's the beginning, the beginning of an avenue we're going to go down in the next several verses of this whole idea of attaching blame. What I want you to see here is both Martha and Mary do a very human thing, and they're attaching blame. Now, it's not a bad thing, it's a human thing. And I just want you to see that her words to Jesus are saying, Lord, if you had been here, it's a human thing to do, that when you and I are in pain, we tend to find something or someone to blame. That we're gonna talk a lot about that. So then we went on and we looked at Jesus's response, and there's lots of written on this particular verse 33, and the primary issue is what emotion did Jesus demonstrate during this occasion? And it really is pointing towards anger. The controversy is that commentators don't like that idea of Jesus being angry, but it's pretty solid to interpret verse 33 like this. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became angry in spirit and very agitated. So that's where I've landed. I think Jesus was angry. And so the question is why he was angry. And this is my statement. It's my opinion that Jesus is expressing anger through his encounter with what I'm calling the convoluted human condition. And as being demonstrated within this grief zone.
Mike,
Yo,
my little translation is subset says it says he troubled himself.
yeah, I mean, that's
The same thing was interesting.
yeah, and commentators go all over with that. They go all over.
He didn't like it.
He didn't like it, and others may not agree with me, but many people are saying, well, really the meaning of this is anger. He's agitated, he's angry. And so the whole question is, why is angry? I took a stab at it. And then verse 33, is this one last slide here, and then we'll move on. Here, Jesus demonstrates anger, but here's the point. He does not attach blame like Martha and Mary did. And this is unique to Jesus. And this is where we want to go. This is where our minds are going to take us here, or this is where my mind is going to facilitate towards, is this idea that Jesus does not, he's agitated, he's angry, but he's not attaching blame. Now, notice there, Jesus does not attach blame. So that's where we were last week. Now we're going to move on. Then he said, after he becomes agitated, he asks this question, where have you laid him? That's Lazarus. And they said to him, Lord, come and see. So they're going to direct him to the actual tomb. And then you've heard lots on verse 35, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Lots been said about that. Jesus simply responds with a question designed to bring him closer to the event, the death event, followed by his weeping. Now, this is important. I think this why, because I believe the scriptures teach us that Jesus represents in human flesh what God is like. And here he is moving towards this death event. He's leaning into it, moving towards it, and I think that's significant. And he is also weeping. Jesus weeps because he's moving towards the grief of the occasion, and he's weeping over the pain the others are experiencing, and very possibly he's weeping over the fact that he's witnessing what this death event has created for these people. Not only this occasion, but whenever death occurs, physical death, there is a remorse, there is a weeping, and this represents, I think, the heart of God. Now the responses, and this is where we want to go to today. There are two responses. See, I've got it underlined, the first one in verse 36. And as this states here, two primary each response, there are two, they represent two perspectives. And that's what we'll talk about. Number one is see how that he loved him. Through Jesus's demonstration, a portion of the crowd are observing. These people see Jesus as much like themselves. They interpret his tears as coming from a person who has joined into the grief of the moment. They see Jesus empathetic, but like themselves, Jesus is powerless in regard to this barrier of death. He's empathetic, but he's powerless. The second group, as we'll see here, underline verse 37, differently. These folks recognize Jesus as one who is potentially different. They say, let me back up, but in contrast, verse 36, some of those present said, question, could this man who opened the eyes of the man who was blind, it's an interesting way to say that, not have also kept this man from dying? Very convoluted sentence, but why didn't he act? And is the question. This man had the power, or this man had the ability, but he refused to act. These folks recognize Jesus as one who is potentially different than them, unlike the first group. Their question resides within the perplexity of why Jesus did not act when he could have saved this man from peril. So you have one group, you have the other. But both groups, this is important, both groups are responding from an all is lost perspective. We keep going back to that. And here we go. This is going to be our discussion. When all is lost, according to Jesus, all is not lost. That's where we can take this. So this position is far different from those who are present. Those present are both, even though they view Jesus differently, they're both coming from this perspective. Some of those perceive Jesus as an empathizing equal, very compassionate, empathizing, but powerless. The other group, they see Jesus, they perceive him as a preventive means. Jesus could have prevented this, but he chose not to. And they're trying to figure out why. And the big arrow, the big bold arrow there represents two different perspectives. Now, what do we do with it? Here's the question. What do you and I think are the upsides and the downsides of each of these perceptions? We've got a death occasion. We've got two mourning sisters. We've got a group from Jerusalem who've come to aid and to identify with and to be part of this death event, the grief zone. And we have a split decision, different perspectives of what has occurred. And then here's the next question. In what way do these perceptions inform how these people relate to this occasion, especially to those who are suffering loss at this time? What are you doing, Bill? So, okay, the floor's open, and we've got these two perspectives. We've got monitors, we've got people here, we got people elsewhere, and so what do you think about this?
Just add a little bit of, Mr. Peterson actually adds something to this. It's very similar. He just said, we started sobbing, a deep anger welled up within him, which validates what you said. The deep anger.
Yeah, yeah.
And so where'd you put him? He says, come and see, they said. Then he says, now Jesus wept. Interesting. He hears him put in the distinctive that he didn't weep until they went to the gravesite.
So what's your thought there?
Well, somehow he didn't, it says here, the other one says, Jesus wept. He said, where'd you put him? He said, come and see, and then Jesus wept. For some reason, Peter felt support that Jesus wept at that time. That he was weeping throughout the whole period. He said, now Jesus wept. And apparently there must be something that indicates that. But I can't figure out why that's important.
So is it more suggestive of the idea that the emotion of anger led him to a weeping?
Well, I think they said that possibly because this is now he wept came after they said, Master, come and see.
Yeah. And
then he said, now Jesus wept. I don't know. I'm not sure why that's important, but he suggested that was a timing event.
It certainly points to the idea of mixed emotion, and it's an emotionally charged time, and there are at least two perspectives. Yeah.
And then the Jews said, look how deeply he loved him. Which Jews are we talking about? The ones on the left or the ones on the right?
Those would be these guys over here, because he's demonstrating through his sorrow, his weeping, his tears, that he loved this man, and he's entering into the same grief zone as the people on the left.
Okay, it depends on your vision of Jesus. If you think when you pray for healing, he has the power and if you say the obligation to heal you, he doesn't heal you. You're with that group on the right. Why not, Jesus? Why couldn't you heal me? What's going on here? On the other side, you perceive Jesus as empathizing with your pain. And maybe the healing will happen, the resurrection.
Yeah,
but right now, he just comes in and walks with you through the struggle.
Yeah, that's generally how I categorize those two groups of people. One is Jesus is compassionate. He's empathetic, he cares, he loves, but yet in this case, he's powerless.
So why pray?
Well, that's
at least to it. If you expect the right-hand side, you're going to get in trouble with praying. It doesn't happen. You're stuck.
Well, the right-hand side, I see prevention. They've got it in their heads, a certain grid, a way of thinking that they're an all is lost.
Yeah, he said he can do it. He chose not to do it.
And that really bugs them.
Yeah, that bugs them.
Why didn't Jesus prevent it?
Yeah, we knew he could have.
Well, yeah, they said, well, why, if he could do this, they made a correlation.
Yeah.
If he can open the eyes of the blind, why couldn't he stop this guy from dying?
Right.
But it's all over now. I mean, they don't see
they don't see the resurrection side, but they're blaming him.
Yeah, they're just like the sister.
Yeah, but they blamed him, but at this point it's all over. But they're having a group weeping session. They're having a morning session. Jesus is joining in the morning. I don't know why, but he is. He knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, see, that's what really makes the person of Jesus so interesting here, because he knows what's going to happen, but yet he enters into the grief and the pain of the moment. I think, Dave, you're getting ready to say something.
All right, simple somethings, I guess.
Well, talk to us. We got time.
All right.
One thing I think is demonstrated here, perhaps primarily with the group on the right, if we want to deal with the groups, And it's something that I certainly have been guilty of, and I think all of us fall into that trap, and that is when we put our expectations on Jesus, on the Lord. When we do that, to one degree or another, we're putting him in a box that says in situation A,
Yes,
he's going to react appropriately the way we see it
Yeah.
to situation A.
Yeah.
He's God.
Yeah.
He's not us. And if our expectations require him to do certain things in certain ways, that's going to result in us being frustrated and doubtful and all the rest of that, because he does not have an obligation, I don't believe, to do any one specific thing.
Right.
He's God. Mankind, I think, is generally uncomfortable with understanding the concept that everything we do and everything we're supposed to be is in deference to and in honor of and in awe of him. Everything. We were created to glorify the Creator. Anything that we do that gets in the way of that, like saying, Jesus, you should have done this, that's not obedience to the ultimate power. We're uncomfortable with things that we can't control.
Yeah.
And
that's helpful.
when the controls don't go our way, we say, well, like you've been pointing out, we need to blame somebody.
Yeah.
So we're blaming Jesus here.
Yeah.
Blaming God is a really slippery slope.
And the reason here, at least from, and I'd like to hear everybody's input, is because I, in this case, am so sure of how it should be.
Yep.
It is the way it is. It's the way I see it. It's over and it shouldn't be over.
Yeah, if I were a Ukrainian soldier now, I stood up and a Russian soldier shot my friend.
Yeah.
My first blame would be that Russian soldier. But I could very easily devote to the Lord, why did you allow this to happen? Why did you allow this war to happen? Why did you allow all this stuff to happen? Because you can take the blame eventually back to God.
Yeah.
How you want to slice and dice it.
Yeah.
Especially when he says forgive your enemies.
Yeah.
It's a very common thread with grief is blaming or asking why. And I think the older we get, and again, in my case, the older we get, the more we should realize that there are many whys that we're not going to get answered. And if we keep beating our head against the wall of the whys, we miss the moment of being able to live in the moment instead of beating our head against the whys of things that have happened.
Do you think, with that statement, do you think it's a healthy activity to change our expectation? Then they had an expectation that Lazarus should not have died.
I think we should live in expectancy rather than expectation.
Okay, and I know you brought that up before, but can you remind us of what your thoughts?
Expectancy means we walk in faith that God is in control, and the expectancy is God will do what he chooses to do in any situation. He's God, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm going to accept that. I'm going to walk in expectancy. Walking in expectation, for me, translates to putting God in a box in one way or another.
Thus, these people here.
Yeah, I step between the two. And Paul says, those who have no resurrection hope. God's in control, but he does promise, I guess you want to say prayers get answered. It's a promise that this is all going to work out in the resurrection, the redemption of mankind, resurrection. And that's good. And he doesn't promise us, well, I'm in charge here. You might suffer pain. You might suffer loss. You might tell ministers, so you might go to hell. But that's not the God I don't think we serve. God can't necessarily, this is a complex world, Joe found out, isn't gonna fix it here, but it's on hold, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
There's this idea in Revelation of all the prayers of the saints staying under the altar, waiting to be answered, I guess.
Yeah.
So if you can trust that, you can go through this world, because you're gonna die anyway. I mean, okay, so with Lazarus was died, the problem's gonna rise later, and Lazarus is gonna die. And they're gonna mourn
Yeah,
again. You know, this doesn't solve the problem. It just gives you a little more time.
Yeah, that's very true.
So he's just demonstrating something that's gonna be important for them to understand in the future. That's what I'm saying. So Dave says, yeah, you're right. You can't, God, you can't twist God's arm ever. But God says, don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm in charge and it's going to be good.
Yeah.
I think I go with that one, and I trust that it's Friday, Sunday's coming kind of idea.
I have a comment. I've had my hand raised for I don't know how long, okay?
All right, well,
Anyway, so can you see
Go ahead.
somebody, can you see somebody raising their hand or not?
Yeah, in the
No.
corner, I see a yellow hand.
Tatsi, when you raised your hand, I saw it, but Bill was just Dave was just starting to talk. And I was looking at my monitor to try to see you, and now I don't see you. But when you speak, you come onto the screen. So I'm not overlooking you. We're not overlooking you, Tatsi. You've got the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe this is a rabbit trail. And I thought about this last week in the sense of what is Jesus angry at? And my feeling actually last week was I felt that he was angry at Satan. Okay. And at the devil. Okay. Because he's the one that tempted us, brought us to sin and whatever. So Jesus is angry that he put all of mankind at risk to be lost because of their sin. Okay. So for me, that puts the perspective in terms of what you brought up here in terms of the tabletop. So I think on the left side, there's someone who served Jesus as an equal, empathizing equal. Well, those people, the upside is they see the love in Jesus, but the downside is they don't recognize that he's not an equal. Okay. And then on the other side, these are the people here who are judging, okay, who judge Jesus. And that is not, that's the downside is it is not our place to judge. Our place is, as you just expressed, Mike, is to let go and to, give things over to the Lord to do and not have us judge what Jesus should do or not do, kind of. Anyway, that's kind of what my perspective is that this thing of anger is actually important in the sense of Jesus is angry, I think, at the devil.
Tatsi, I agree with you, but I would use a different word, and I don't know why. He's angry at death. I don't know if the devil has the final say on death or not, but death itself is something that he's angry at. John Donne kind of death being not proud idea. The death as he personified it. But yes, I agree with you, but the point is he's angry at the situation in the world where death reigns. That seems to have the last word.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this?
How's our seminary student there, Steve?
Well, I look at this as sort of a pivotal point here. On the left side, an empathic Jesus is a comfort. as we know from scripture and as we know from experience. On the right side, and I suppose I skate on some pretty thin ice here, but to me, this is pivotal because an all-powerful, all-good God, how do I reconcile that with suffering and evil in the world, so to speak?
Yeah.
And here's where I really wrestle with it in a sense is, I just, I'm down here in a zone that was struck by Hurricane Ian. And Christians have said, well, we lost, a room in our house because the roofing tiles came off and the water came in, and now we've got mold, but it could have been so much worse. God protected us. Well, and here's where I skate on thin ice. And I know what you're saying, Dave, about a box, but God could have kept the roofing tiles on, or God could have directed Ian out into the ocean and never struck at all. And so how do I, reconcile that, God seemingly to allow evil, so to speak? Brings to mind a byline or a word from a song that Wayne Watson wrote, I think in the late 1980s or early 1990s, in reflecting on the deaths of cancer of a close friend. And he writes in the song, I'm trying hard not to think you unkind in relation to God. It's a very honest reflection, because we know God could prevent these things. So the mystery there, it's troublesome. I think we have to be really careful with this question, particularly when dealing with folks that do not believe, in terms of what we say in the face of evil, and the face of sort of life in a fallen world. And you're exactly right, Bill. We do await a final reconciliation and work of redemption here. But in the meantime, it can be pretty tough when you're in the middle of it. And you see suffering.
Yeah, that damn meantime,
Yeah.
I was thinking of that I think it's a proverb or something in the Bible, Ecclesiastes maybe. It's that the race doesn't go to the swift or the battle to the strong. It's the stuff that you expect. Many times that's not what happens. You would expect the big guy to win all the time, and then he loses. And you expect the fastest runner to win the race, but then he doesn't. And it's like, if God did everything that we would have him do, I mean, it sounds like a joke, maybe. I'd be afraid to leave the house. If God, defeated gravity just at somebody's whim, I expect when I fall off the roof to go down. If I fell off the roof and went up, or went sideways or hovered or something, because my neighbor's praying, it was like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is contrary to reality. This is contrary to the world that God made. Why was it a temptation to Jesus when the devil said, cast yourself off the temple, the angels will have charge over thee? I guess maybe, but I'm not doing that. There are rules that we have to live by as human beings.
There's a movie where Jim Carrey is playing God for a while, and it comes to his computer, the prayer requests have all just lined up on his screen, so he just goes yes to all, and chaos just breaks out, And if you saw that one or not, but he goes yes to all of them, and everybody wins the lottery, and everybody gets, the world just kind of goes crazy.
I'd like to circle back to one point that Steve made that is so important too, and that is, I believe that many of us as believers And certainly many, I think many who are not believers ignore or wish that, or don't see that, or don't recognize that there is indeed evil in the world. Sometimes we like to think that, well, it just can't really be there. Some horrible thing happens and we say, well, that just can't, I mean, the phrase often is that just can't be, that just couldn't have happened. Well, it did, and it does, because there is evil. And like we're agreeing indirectly with one another, we understand that ultimately that evil will be defeated. But in the meantime, there is evil in the world, and it is active.
Which is Steve's thing when dealing with people who aren't Christians, they look at you and say, why bother? It's an interesting question.
My thought,
I think that what happens sometimes when people blame, Jesus, if you had been here, it wouldn't have happened, or you see a homeless guy on the sidewalk begging, and you go, how did you get here? Oftentimes it's not an inquiry of compassion. It's like, give me the reason this happened to you so I can check it off on my list of don't do those things. I don't want to be sitting next to you one day. It's like, I don't eat barbecue. That's why I don't have stomach cancer. I don't smoke. That's why I don't have lung cancer. I guess I'm safe. I don't have these things happen to me that happen to you because I don't make the mistakes in life that you made. And what seems to be a compassionate inquiry really is a blame, of the person. And in reality, that guy didn't do anything either. He's just living his life. The world is crazy. Stuff happens to people that's out of their control. They didn't do anything. They crossed the street and a lunatic ran them over. And now their life is not the same anymore, and they're begging for meals, and you can't say, I didn't do your mistake, so I guess I'm safe. Well, he didn't do a mistake either. He's just living his life. So I think many times the solution to these kinds of blame game inquiries, or God blessed my house, that's why my neighbor's house is gone in a tornado and mine is still here. It's like, what, does God love me more? It's like, did you sin twice the sin that I sinned, so your house is gone and mine's not? I mean, Jesus addressed that, with the towers of Siloam, wherever the heck that was. And it's you have to be comfortable with what is, what Bob is talking about. It's like, this is what we got. You're sick. I got it. This is what we've got. I don't know why you're sick. I don't know why God allows you to stay sick. I don't know why my praying for you you didn't get delivered, but the reality right at this moment is you're sick. How do we deal with living with that? Do you still love God? Do you still believe in God? Do you still pray? Are you like Job, curse God and die? It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I know I'm scraping boils off my arms with this broken pot. I have no idea why this is happening to me. I haven't a clue, but I'll be damned if I'm going to give up on God, and I think that's the lesson. You got to live with reality. This is what we got.
And all of them. Vince, Job does have a view there where he says in there somewhere that I know in the end time, I will stand before him. There's that phrase they use in the Messiah, that somehow Job is aware that this is going to work out.
I think
he's mad, but he still says that in the end, I will stand before my creator. I can't remember the exact quote, but in the flesh.
he's stating that by faith.
By faith, yeah.
And I
Steve,
think without that, in a sense, you can land in a square that says life is sort of a meaningless and cruel joke.
Yeah.
To me, if it's totally random, you know what I'm saying? And there is nothing more than this randomness. Yeah, I tend to fall into a hole of sort of despair and hopelessness without the long view.
Well, sometimes the randomness is it's random to you. There are causes for things happening. There is a reason why you get run over by a car. It could be the guy that ran you over had a fight with his wife and drinking and ran you over. So it's not specific to your actions. It's specific to somebody's actions. But to say that you should have looked both ways, it's your fault. Or you should have crossed at the crosswalk, it's your fault. Or didn't they teach you to look around and be careful? And I did everything right. I did everything that I'm supposed to do, and this lunatic killed me, you know. and it's not my fault. It just isn't my fault. It's this guy's fault, or it's 5 people behind him. It's the billiard ball game. You know, it's his boss fired him. What is it, his fault that he drank and then he got in a car and he yelled at his wife, and his wife choked him while he's driving and ran you over? I mean,
If you look down the end of it, Vince, you get to where Job's at, and it's God's fault. Why? You know, why'd you do this, God? I mean, yeah, I didn't look for that guy ran into me, but God's in control of everything. I got hit. God's fault. He could have kept me up at that curve 2 seconds longer before I stepped out, you know.
God's very big. He can take that kind of criticism.
Yeah.
35 years ago, I was when I maybe came face to face with part of what I'm trying to express, and it's kind of a thread to what Vince was saying. Years and years ago, 35, almost 40 years ago, probably, Betty and I were friends with a couple, and she was stricken with a brain cancer. And we had been praying with them and trying to encourage them. And she went into a final, what turned out to be a final surgical situation. And I felt moved. I felt the Lord was telling me to go to the hospital and pray through the night and the morning of the surgery without ceasing. And I'd never done that before. Never felt to be called to pray that long, that specifically at the place and this, that, and the other. So I felt really confident in what I felt God was going to do, that this was going to be a healing and a miraculous one. And I really felt that it wasn't about me. I just felt that I was being obedient and that God was going to be glorified through all this. And I went in there with that attitude and that certainty. And within 36 hours, she was dead. And I had to grapple with, well, no, wait a minute. You know, I was standing on promises. I was standing on faith. I was standing on what I felt I'd been obedient and what I was supposed to do, that I was being a vehicle. So that was maybe the first time in my faith journey where I had to sit back and say, well, why didn't you heal her? Right. Jesus, why didn't you come?
Right.
Same kind of question.
Same question.
And I look back 35 or 40 years to answer that question, and I still cannot answer that question. She was a beautiful, believing woman, you know, all the right things. And yet, now, what I can see more clearly now than I did then. And it's too cute a phrase to use too often, but for the believer, death is the ultimate victory.
But at the
You know,
time,
we're out of here.
but the time you were there, trying to pray and expecting healing, I don't know how to phrase this. You were wasting time and you could have been using your time saying goodbye and comforting. And I'm on the bed, I'm on my deathbed and people are coming in and they just wanted to say goodbye to me and all this stuff. Or they can sit around and say, we're praying for your healing. Don't worry, you're not going to die. I say, wait a minute, I want to be with you. I mean,
Yeah.
this isn't what I need right now. And are you wasting my time or not? You know, that's sometimes where the positive thinking Christians can cause damage, if you will, coming into, because it's so important to them to be right. Then you'll get healed. They don't pay attention to the need that's there, which is to be empathized. It's an interesting balance, I know.
Jesus seems to be talking more in line with how you're talking.
Well, that's good to know.
He does, and I just haven't found the language. I don't understand this, but he's entering into the grief of the moment of the death. But yet he's saying that he who believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? And so that in itself is a mystery, it's a tension.
Yeah,
And I think what we're grappling with, what do we do with that?
throughout this whole section of scripture, and we talked about it last week, it's so interesting, not the right word, mysterious, phenomenal, but throughout this whole section of scripture, we're seeing Jesus the man and Jesus God like this. And there are points where it's very difficult to make any distinction. Well, to me, his weeping was the man weeping for his friend.
Yeah.
And then it's, you know, he moves, like you said, when all was lost, he knows all is not lost. And that's where he's angry, is that the people don't understand that.
Yeah.
So that's a frustrated God, if you will.
When he says you'll never die, remember later on they said, our brother Lazarus, he goes, he's sleeping. Remember that? He said he's sleeping. Was Jesus?
He had to explain what that.
I was gonna say, if he's sleeping, he can somebody's got a
is.
and
He's on there twice now, somehow.
Thank you.
Taro, do you have two setups there?
Two's better than one, Bill.
I know. Anyway, so, but the point is, I don't think he was lying when he said he was sleeping, but they didn't get it. He said, okay, from your perspective, he's
It's a
dead.
different perspective.
Your perspective, he's dead. So when he says, whoever believes in me will never die, what he's saying, I guess, if we have to take it real literal about this, he's saying, when everyone else sees you dying, you're going to sleep.
Yeah.
They don't know it, but I do.
Yeah.
And then I'll wake you up at the right time.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So where my tension is, we've kind of shared in relation, my response to the slide, the left and the right. I believe in a God who's empathetic. I choose that by faith. And because I see it, I believe it by faith. But preventive, certainly I have been there. I've had false expectations like everybody else. And where that tension is seeing itself here, right now is this idea of prayer. I find myself judging what is valid and what is not valid for prayer, and that in itself is sin. I mean, who am I to judge? But I see such a tendency in us people to go to God, and I keep going back to that analogy of a gumball machine. Remember the little the little bubble with the, you put a penny in and you do the little lever and out comes a gumball, oh God, pray for my teenage boy. He's going on a trip and pray for safety. To me, that just seems so lame on one hand, but yet who am I to judge what is lame and not lame? Of course, I'm called to prayer. And if that's where I am, that's a valid prayer.
Raise all kinds of prayers for all things. I mean,
Yes, yes. And so there is where the tension is, for me. Of course, does Jesus care about my youngest or my son on a trip and his safety? I think so. I think God is a God of empathy and care. But can I put in my penny and swipe it and get a prayer request out that's guaranteed that is gonna, no guarantee. So that in itself is a mystery. So my response is incorrect. I'm not to judge what's a valid prayer. We are to pray. So yeah, go ahead.
Vincent, say something out loud.
Excuse me?
Okay, now Mike, say something. Steve, say something out loud.
Oh, are you going back to the technical stuff?
No, just, yeah, whoever talks out loud pops up in that screen up there.
Yeah,
So we can watch who's talking.
Yeah.
Right now I'm talking and it's paying attention to me.
yeah, I think that's set up.
Vince somehow got in the act there.
Yeah. Mike, I've always thought it sounds disrespectful perhaps, but God's going to do what he wants to do, whether I pray or not. I think that's what I've concluded.
Yeah.
So when I try to, I've had friends who try to craft their prayers very carefully, that when they would pray for me, they would pray for the tendon underneath the muscle of my right arm and 1.5 inches away from my scapula and blah, 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 blah. Like they were doctors or something. And they were specific to pray for these things. Like if they got it wrong, somehow the prayer wouldn't work, and I would joke with them, and this isn't the monkey's paw. This isn't some sort of Twilight Zone episode. God gets it. He wants you to heal Vince's shoulder. I understand. And if it's God's will to heal Vince's shoulder, he'll do it. And if it isn't, then he won't. And what you say is not directing his steps, So if I pray for the Broncos to win and the other team prays for their team, and it's like it becomes silly after a while.
Yeah.
It's like you do it because you're a human being. You do it because our culture tells you to do it. And you do it because you feel better. But to think that God is up there, how many do we get for the Broncos? Jesus, he's tallying the prayers. He's going to do what he does. My grandma's prayer, life and death is not dependent on whether I had a sandwich before I prayed or not.
Right.
Oh, you should have fasted. Well, then she's going to have to die. Sorry, you were hungry. But prayer and fasting, no good. Doesn't work that way. It becomes silly.
You hit the nail on the head, Vince, regarding this tension that I was trying to express is I see such foolishness, what I perceive as foolishness in what we ask God to do or not do, in some regard, that in itself leads me to a cynicism that I think is sin. I don't want to be a cynical. I think we ought to pray. And I think we ought, and if we are to pray, everything in me wants to pray. When
I think God gets a kick out of it. It's a sweet smell.
Well, that's how we have to look at it, I think. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're human beings. He made us the way we are, and if he looks down if wherever he is, you know, you see Vince praying for, I hope I win this race. He goes, race? There are people in Africa starving to death. You want to win a race?
Yeah.
This is what you come to me with?
We're starving to death.
He probably gets a kick out of it and says, well, that's not gonna happen, Vince. You should have practiced.
The early church prayed and Peter got released from prison.
Right, it does,
And,
yeah.
and James got his head cut off. I mean, go figure.
It's,
Yeah, John, the greatest one, John the Baptist. You got his head.
Yeah, and I mean, James in the church after their church. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm sure they were praying for James too, you know.
yeah.
So.
Stephen was stoned to death.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
where the heck was he? Jesus stood up. He looked good look at it, but he still got stoned to death. Who knows?
We're gonna move towards wrapping up here, and what I just want to say a couple things in closing is that, wow, I think we all agree that the blame game is not what the kind of men we want to be. It is very common, very, very common. Out, you said with grief, which is true, that's the case here. I think it's absolutely everywhere and permeates our society. But yet, what is the alternative and how does Jesus speak into that alternative? That's what really intrigues me. And that's what we're going to look at because I think the text bears it out. Dave, you had mentioned a little bit earlier about this section of the text. It's unique to John and where we're going with this. Unique to the content in John's gospel. I think it ties in exactly with what his purpose is as stated later in the gospel. And that's what we're going to talk about. This morning, this discussion, this idea of the blame game led us to the discussion of prayer. And we shared kind of our perspectives on that. You know, we talked about a lot of different things, can't really summarize and focus, but what we're seeing here is very unique. And I'll leave you with this. In the context of grief, the story itself bears out that there is a high need within these people to attach blame to what has occurred. We've seen it through Martha, Mary, and a portion of the crowd. Jesus, when he's confronted, Lord, why were you not here? He did not attach blame. He became angry and did not attach blame. And that is specifically unique. And that's where we want to pick up on next week next week. We'll meet next week. We'll be here at the booth.
Y'all come.
Steve, I've really appreciated your comments the last 2 weeks and kind of your pep talks. How was this morning's experience? Try to save you some time. How was this morning's experience remotely compared to what you had last week or the week before?
It's a whole new level and it works very well.
Okay, good. Well, very good. I'm going to let you guys go. Everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Don't sign off.
What's that?
Don't sign off.
Okay, don't, and Bill said don't sign off.
They can sign off. Don't you sign off. Don't leave the meeting.
We got it.
I don't care what they do. Don't you leave the meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, okay. So you guys leave the meeting. I'm supposed to stay on. So have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everybody, and we'll see you next Wednesday for our study. Thanks for the discussion, and we'll take it from here. Let's try it again next week. Bye for now.
Okay, Mike, look at this. I don't know if you knew this, maybe it's not. Keep presenting. Okay, there's two of you.
Yeah, there's two of me
Yeah.
because this one is focused here
Right.
and this one is focused here.
So why do we need this one?
because they said pointed towards you. I originally had it set for
I know,
you.
but that one is picking you up.
I want to, I want to.
Yeah.
I'm recording.
Shut up. But just shut that. You know?